You want to be able to spend more time with your daughter. Always told Mr. Clark he was not your daughter's father. And
because it's a little child's life at stake, and my life is at stake too. To me, she's my princess, and I really care about her.
We had an argument about bills as usual. He stormed out the door, so I stormed out the door too. And we had got a hotel room, and that night I had sex with Mr. Moore. That's the night I think I conceived.
then you cheated with Mr. Moore.
Yes.
So when you found out she was pregnant, you immediately said, "This is my child." You went to doctor's appointments?
No, Your Honor.
You didn't. Were you at the hospital when the baby was born? You signed the birth certificate?
Yes, Your Honor.
You did. He thinks this is his child, and you know in your mind you say that it's not?
Yes, ma'am. We had got into it one day about the bills as usual. And when I came home, I showed him the ultrasound, and I showed it to him, and then I told him he might not be the father.
Do you remember?
They came into the courtroom carrying years of confusion, anger, and quiet hope, all centered around one little girl who had no voice in the matter but stood at the heart of everything. Mr. Clark walked in believing he was a father fighting for his child. Ms. Bolden walked in believing she already knew the truth and wanted it proven once and for all. Between them was a 3-year-old girl, LaCarney, whose life had been shaped by uncertainty since the day she was conceived. Mr. Clark explained that from the moment he learned Ms. Bolden was pregnant, he never doubted the child was his. He said he stood by her, went to appointments, waited through the pregnancy, and was there when the baby was born. He signed the birth certificate without hesitation. To him, this was not a question of biology alone. It was about a bond. He described LaCarney as his princess, his whole world, the child who ran to him, smiled at him, and recognized him as her father. The idea of losing her felt unbearable. Ms. Bolden told a different story. She explained that during her relationship with Mr. Clark, they constantly argued, especially about bills. One night, after a heated argument, she left the house and contacted another man, Mr. Moore. That night, she admitted, she had sex with him, and in her mind, that was when LaCarney was conceived. She said that from that point on, she believed Mr. Clark was not the biological father. The court pressed her on whether she ever told Mr. Clark about this possibility. She said she did, first during her pregnancy after showing him an ultrasound, and later again when the child was about a year old. Mr. Clark remembered things differently. He admitted she may have made comments during arguments, but he believed those words were said out of anger, meant to hurt him. In his heart, he said, he never believed them. He felt the child was his, and nothing shook that belief. As time passed, LaCarney grew, and so did the emotional damage. Mr. Clark continued to see her as his daughter and formed a deep bond with her. Meanwhile, Ms. Bolden admitted she stopped reminding him of the possible truth. She said she didn't want to hurt him anymore, so she let him continue believing he was the father. It wasn't until the child was around 1 year old that she brought it up again, saying she felt the child didn't resemble him and looked more like the other man. Mr. Moore entered the picture as the second possible father. He said he believed LaCarney was his child because of physical resemblance. He wanted a DNA test before fully stepping into a fatherly role. His involvement had been limited, partly because Ms. Bolden frequently changed her phone number and made contact difficult. Still, members of his family had already accepted LaCarney as their own. Mr. Moore's brother testified that from day one, he believed LaCarney was his niece. He said the family bought her gifts, spent time with her, and felt certain she belonged to them because of how much she looked like their family. This testimony deeply hurt Mr. Clark. He described moments like Christmas, when he used his hard-earned money to buy gifts for LaCarney, only to find out later she had opened them elsewhere, surrounded by another family claiming her as their own. The emotional tension grew heavier when it became clear that LaCarney was being pulled into 2 different worlds. She was calling more than one man Daddy, and adults around her were arguing over her identity instead of protecting her innocence. One witness even admitted how confusing this must be for the child. hearing different names, and feeling different expectations from the people around her. Mr. Clark broke down as he spoke about the possibility of losing her. He said he didn't know how he would survive emotionally if the test proved she wasn't his. Still, he came to court hopping for clarity, not just for himself, but for La Carney's future. He wanted stability, truth, and the chance to continue loving her openly and without doubt. When the DNA results were finally revealed, the courtroom shifted. The biological truth matched Mr. Clark's belief. He was La Carney's father. Relief washed over him instantly. Years of doubt, pain, and fear collapsed into one overwhelming moment of validation. For him, the bond he felt all along had finally been confirmed. Ms. Bolden's reaction was noticeably different. She said the result didn't change how she felt. Even after the truth was established, she showed resistance to allowing Mr. Clark to be fully involved in the child's life, citing their inability to get along. The court reminded her that, regardless of personal conflict, Mr. Clark had a legal and moral right to his child, and La Carney had a right to her father. The judge emphasized that if handled correctly, La Carney could grow up surrounded by love instead of conflict. The other family, though disappointed, agreed to continue caring about her well-being. The focus, the judge made clear, had to shift from adult resentment to the child's emotional safety. Just as that chapter closed, another family stepped into the courtroom carrying a different kind of pain. This case involved a young mother, Ms. Lusk, and the grandmother of a deceased man, Ms. Page. At the center was a little girl named Summery, whose father had passed away before her birth. The question was not only about paternity, but about truth, grief, and accusations tied to money. Ms. Lusk explained how she became pregnant at 16 and had been raising her daughter with the help of her own mother. She described years of struggle, working multiple jobs, going back to school, and doing everything alone. She believed Summery's father was Ms. Page's son, who had died before he could ever meet his child. Ms. Page, the grandmother, strongly denied this. She said her son was in a committed relationship with another woman and that she had never heard of Ms. Lusk until after his death. She accused Ms. Lusk of coming forward only because there was a life insurance policy involved. To her, this was not about family but about money. The accusations cut deep. Ms. Lusk spoke about the pain of being judged, ignored, and attacked on social media. She described being blocked, silenced, and publicly shamed while trying to protect her child. She explained how she learned about her pregnancy just days after the funeral and how overwhelming it was to grieve someone she loved while carrying his child in secret. Ms. Page admitted she was grieving and angry. She said she had no way to ask her son the truth, no way to confirm what really happened in his private life. All she had were assumptions and memories, and she clung to them fiercely. The courtroom became a place where grief spilled out as anger and fear turned into accusations. The judge slowed everything down, reminding both women that beneath the shouting was a child who needed truth, identity, and peace. She acknowledged the grandmother's pain and the young mother's trauma, making it clear that this was not about winning an argument, but about honoring a life that was lost and protecting a life that was just beginning. The DNA results would soon reveal whether Summery truly belonged to the family she had been denied. But before that moment arrived, the courtroom sat heavy with emotion. Two women, broken in different ways, waited for a truth that could either divide them further or force them to face a shared reality they could no longer escape. The room fell silent as the judge prepared everyone for the truth that had been delayed for years. This case was no longer about accusations, Facebook posts, or old arguments. It was about a little girl who deserved to know where she came from and who belonged to her. The judge made it clear that grief had distorted everyone's behavior, but grief could not be allowed to erase facts. Ms. Page sat stiffly, holding onto the image of her son as she knew him. In her mind, he was loyal, committed, and incapable of creating a situation like this. Losing him had already shattered her world, and the thought that there might be a grandchild she never knew about felt like another loss she wasn't prepared to face. Every word she spoke carried pain, suspicion, and fear of being taken advantage of. Ms. Lusk, on the other hand, looked exhausted. She had spent years defending herself, not just as a young mother but as someone whose truth had been questioned at every turn. She described how alone she felt after finding out she was pregnant, how she couldn't even grieve properly because she was trying to survive. She explained that she never asked for money, never asked for favors, and only wanted her daughter to know who her father was. The tension between them grew as both women spoke over one another, each trying to be heard, each believing the other was refusing to understand. The judge stepped in firmly, reminding them that this constant fighting was doing nothing but deepening wounds. She explained that no matter how painful the truth might be, it was better than living in denial or hatred. The DNA testing process was explained carefully. Because the alleged father was deceased, the court could not test him directly. Instead, they tested his surviving parent to determine whether there was a biological relationship between the grandmother and the child. It was the closest scientific answer they could get, and it would be enough to establish the truth. As the results were read, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. The numbers spoke clearly. There was a 99.96% probability that Samarie was biologically related to Ms. Page. In that moment, the argument stopped. The shouting ended. The truth stood alone, undeniable and final. The judge addressed both women directly. She spoke about how bitterness, anger, and public fighting dishonored the memory of the man they both loved in different ways. She reminded Ms. Page that her son's legacy did not end with his death. It lived on through his child, through stories, pictures, and love. She reminded Ms. Lusk that while she had every right to feel hurt, she also had a responsibility to protect her daughter from future pain. Ms. Page looked overwhelmed. She admitted that she didn't know how to handle the situation, that it felt like too much all at once. The judge acknowledged that grief does not come with instructions, but emphasized that refusing to accept the child would not erase the truth. Whether she chose to be involved or not, Samarie deserved to know that her father existed, that he mattered, and that he was loved. The judge urged both sides to step away from social media warfare and focus on what truly mattered. She explained that children grow up hearing the stories adults tell about their origins, and those stories shape their identity. A child raised on bitterness carries that pain into adulthood. A child raised on truth and compassion has a chance to heal what adults could not. As the court session came to a close, the emotional weight of both cases lingered in the air. Two different families, two different children, but the same underlying lesson. When adults allow anger, jealousy, or grief to guide their actions, children pay the price. When adults choose honesty, even when it hurts, children gain stability. Mr. Clark left the courtroom with his truth confirmed, but with work still ahead of him. Being a father was no longer a question, but co-parenting with someone who resented him would not be easy. Still, he had clarity, and that clarity gave him strength. His bond with La Carney was no longer fragile or uncertain. It was real, protected by law and truth. Ms. Bolden walked away knowing she could no longer deny reality. The excuses she had used for years no longer held weight. Whether she liked it or not, her daughter had a father who wanted to be present. The future would require compromise, maturity, and putting her child's needs above her personal feelings. Ms. Lusk left with validation, but also with the heavy responsibility of guiding her daughter through a complicated family history. She now had proof of what she always believed, but proof did not erase the emotional damage already done. She would have to decide how much access Samuri would have to her father's family and how to navigate that relationship with care. Ms. Page was left with a truth she never wanted but could not deny. A grandchild she had argued against was now undeniably part of her family. The judge made it clear that her choice moving forward would define her role, not just as a grieving mother, but as a grandmother. In both cases, the courtroom served as a place where truth finally caught up with years of denial. The children at the center of these stories would grow up one day and ask questions. When they did, the answers would matter. What adults chose to do after learning the truth would shape those answers forever. These were not stories about winning or losing. They were stories about accountability, about facing uncomfortable realities, and about choosing what kind of legacy to leave behind. At the end of the day, the court could determine paternity, but it could not force love, cooperation, or healing. That responsibility remained with the adults who walked out those doors. The judge's final words echoed long after the session ended. Every child deserves to know who they are and where they come from. Every child deserves peace instead of conflict. And every adult, no matter how broken, has a choice to either pass pain forward or stop it where they stand. As the courtroom emptied, the weight of what had been revealed did not disappear. Truth has a way of settling slowly, especially when it has been avoided for so long. For everyone involved, the DNA results did not magically heal the damage that years of doubt, arguments, and emotional distance had caused. Instead, they marked a beginning, one that demanded responsibility rather than denial. For Mr. Clark, the confirmation that La Carney was his daughter brought relief, but it also brought clarity. He was no longer fighting for recognition. He was fighting for a future. He understood that being a father was more than proving biology in a courtroom. It meant patience, consistency, and learning how to protect his child emotionally, even when her mother made that difficult. He had spent years loving a child without certainty. Now, with certainty in his hands, he knew he could not walk away, no matter how hard the road ahead might be. Ms. Bolden faced a different reality. For years, she had controlled access, controlled information, and controlled the narrative. The test stripped that power away. She could no longer use uncertainty as a shield. The court made it clear that personal resentment did not outweigh a child's right to her father. Whether she felt ready or not, she would have to adjust, not for Mr. Clark's sake, but for La Carney. The judge's words about cooperation echoed in the silence Ms. Bolden carried with her. Conflict had become normal for her, almost easier than compromise. But now, every choice she made would either strengthen her daughter's sense of security or damage it further. The truth had placed a mirror in front of her, and what she did next would define her role as a mother far more than anything she said in court. In the second case, the emotional aftermath was even more complicated. Ms. Lusk had fought for recognition not only for herself, but for a child whose father would never walk into a courtroom to defend her existence. She had lived with judgment since she was 16, forced to grow up faster than most, carrying both grief and responsibility at the same time. The DNA results did not give her closure. They gave her proof. And proof, while powerful, does not erase years of being dismissed and doubted. She thought about the day she found out she was pregnant, only days after the man she loved had died. There was no celebration, no shared excitement, no future plans made together. There was only fear and silence. For years, she had carried the weight of explaining a father who was gone, a family who didn't want to believe her, and a world that assumed her intentions were selfish. The courtroom finally validated her truth, but it could not give her back the years she spent defending it. Ms. Page sat with a truth she had spent years pushing away. Her grief had hardened into suspicion, and suspicion had turned into anger. Losing her son left a hole nothing could fill, and the idea of another reminder of him walking around in the world felt overwhelming. She had protected herself by denying the possibility of a grandchild, because accepting it meant accepting how much she had already lost. The judge made it clear that grief did not excuse cruelty. Pain did not justify public attacks, insults, or rejection of a child who had done nothing wrong. Ms. Page was not ordered to love, but she was challenged to reflect. Her choices moving forward would not only shape her relationship with Samuri, but also the way her son would be remembered through his child. The courtroom had done its job. It had delivered facts. What happened next was not written in any legal document. It would happen in phone calls answered or ignored, birthdays acknowledged or forgotten, and conversations held privately instead of publicly. The future for both children depended on whether the adults involved chose growth over pride. Lakarni would grow older and ask questions. She would want to know why things were difficult, why there were arguments, and why love sometimes came with conditions. One day, she would understand that her father never stopped fighting for her. What she might struggle with is understanding why that fight was ever necessary. Samuri would grow up knowing her father through stories, pictures, and the memories others carried for her. She would ask why he wasn't there, why her family didn't come together sooner, and why adults argued instead of listening. The answers she received would shape her sense of worth and belonging. The judge's final message applied to everyone who had stood before her that day. Children inherit more than names and DNA. They inherit emotional environments. When adults choose conflict, children carry that tension. When adults choose honesty and restraint, children gain room to heal. These cases were reminders that paternity is not just a legal question. It is an emotional responsibility. Proving who a father is does not automatically make someone a parent, and denying truth does not protect anyone from pain. In both stories, the real test began after the results were read. As the doors closed behind them, the court could no longer intervene. It was up to the parents, the grandparents, and the families to decide whether these children would grow up surrounded by bitterness or supported by truth. The judge had given them clarity. What they did with it would become part of the children's stories forever. They came into the courtroom carrying years of confusion, anger, and quiet hope, all centered around one little girl who had no voice in the matter but stood at the heart of everything. Mr. Clark walked in believing he was a father fighting for his child. Ms. Bolden walked in believing she already knew the truth and wanted it proven once and for all. Between them was a 3-year-old girl, Lakarni, whose life had been shaped by uncertainty since the day she was conceived. Mr. Clark explained that from the moment he learned Ms. Bolden was pregnant, he never doubted the child was his. He said he stood by her, went to appointments, waited through the pregnancy, and was there when the baby was born. He signed the birth certificate without hesitation. To him, this was not a question of biology alone. It was about a bond. He described Lakarni as his princess, his whole world, the child who ran to him, smiled at him, and recognized him as her father. The idea of losing her felt unbearable. Ms. Bolden told a different story. She explained that during her relationship with Mr. Clark, they constantly argued, especially about bills. One night, after a heated argument, she left the house and contacted another man, Mr. Moore. That night, she admitted, she had sex with him, and in her mind, that was when Lakarni was conceived. She said that from that point on, she believed Mr. Clark was not the biological father. The court pressed her on whether she ever told Mr. Clark about this possibility. She said she did, first during her pregnancy after showing him an ultrasound, and later again when the child was about a year old. Mr. Clark remembered things differently. He admitted she may have made comments during arguments, but he believed those words were said out of anger, meant to hurt him. In his heart, he said, he never believed them. He felt the child was his, and nothing shook that belief. As time passed, Lacarney grew, and so did the emotional damage. Mr. Clark continued to see her as his daughter and formed a deep bond with her. Meanwhile, Ms. Bolden admitted she stopped reminding him of the possible truth. She said she didn't want to hurt him anymore, so she let him continue believing he was the father. It wasn't until the child was around 1 year old that she brought it up again, saying she felt the child didn't resemble him